This podcast can be found on Podbean, Spotify, and YouTube. Hello and welcome to the Paper Prototypes podcast. My name is Rex, and I'm here with Bronze, the developer behind Granvir. So Bronze, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got into game development?
Hello, I am the developer of Granvir, as mentioned. It's a mech game, so I'm into mechs right now. But in terms of how I got into game development, I was in college and I went to school for mechanical engineering, not software. And I kept ending up on all my group projects. I would always be the guy that had to write the code for some reason, even though I don't have any like actual background in that. And that happened enough where eventually I kind of figured it out. And I was playing this game called RoboCraft. Have you ever heard of that?
Oh yeah, Robocraft.
I was obsessed with that game. I think I have over 1,000 hours in it. And I wanted to kind of I had an idea for a game and I really liked their building system, but that game annoyed me so much, as all games you play for 1,000 hours tend to do. So I made a game between classes, basically. I was, coping, telling myself, oh, I'm just gonna learn to code by making a game. It'll be useful. I keep ending up having to do this in all my group projects, so maybe it'll be useful. And that was some really good cope because I made that game. It's called Airmen. It was about building airships. It released a long time ago at this point, like 8 years ago. I don't remember. I'd have to check Steam to see what the year was. And mechanical engineering didn't really work out. And then I got a job in software development after that game released. And then that kind of locked me in. And then now I'm a game developer.
Wow, now that you mention... Oh shit, what was the name of the game you said it was called?
Airmen was my first game.
Oh, the game that inspired it.
Oh, RoboCraft.
Yes, now that you say Robocraft, and I was looking up videos of airmen before I did this, I totally can see the inspiration with the block placement and how the ships work and everything.
Yeah, it's more or less the same like voxel-based building system, and then like the main difference was like in RoboCraft, anything can attach to anything. In Airmen, there were like different types of connections, so you couldn't just attach whatever you wanted. And then of course you built totally different vehicles. But I love vehicle building, so that's where we started.
So now you've gone on to develop Granvir. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about that game?
So Granvir is a mech building roguelite. I like to call it a mech builder roguelite, like deck builder. And the premise of it is that you start out with a crapper mech that is like for farming, and you'll do your missions with your dinky little cannons and punching things with your fists, and you'll find loot in a mission. You'll swap out the parts on your mech, and then by the end, you're a totally different, super-powered mega mech flying across the battlefield, firing 8 cannons at once, stuff like that. So, and then, roguelite. So if you're dead, you're dead, and you're trying to kind of stay on top of the escalating difficulty and beat the boss at the end.
Did your background in mechanical engineering help influence either of the two games?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Designs? I don't think I would have been able to make either of these games without all the mechanical engineering classes I took, mainly the physics courses, especially with the first game, because it's easy to put a rigid body in a scene in Unity, but to understand at least enough physics to make something that is interesting gameplay wise and not like a nightmare to control, like simulating all the rudders and the lift mechanics, and then not just understanding those, but understanding how to break the rules of that to make the game actually like fun to play. Because if you build a giant balloon or whatever, if your center of lift is not directly above your center of mass, you'll start to tilt. So if you don't really understand how to calculate those things, you'll never be able to do the math to apply a small correction to those things so players don't have to build the perfect ship every time. So massively helpful on my first game. A little less so on this one. I still use rigid bodies to control the mechs and stuff like that, but a lot more straightforward in terms of the actual physical forces applied.
And what inspired you to make Granvir specifically as your second game?
So the inspiration for Granvir was a conversation I had with my boss at the time about this cool new game coming out called Armored Core 6. I knew absolutely nothing about Armored Core, but he thought it was really cool. And he was describing to me what the old games were like. And he said, it's, a mech game where you fly in and you blow everything up, but you have to pay for your ammo. And when you do a mission, you might be super easy. You blow everybody up with big missiles and all that, but you end up losing money at the end and kind of losing because you spent all your money on ammunition. Then Armored Core 6 came out and it was nothing like that, but that's besides the point. But I really liked that concept. And it really felt like mechs were growing in mind share. And I love vehicle building games. So it kind of felt like a really good space to make a game in at the time. And I think it still is. But that's kind of where it conceptually came from. And from there, I think I worked on it before release for like 3 years.
So is Armored Core your only frame of reference for mechs, or did you end up getting more into the genre as you progressed making the game or after playing Armored Core?
I had not played any Armored Core until 6 came out. I am horribly uncultured in the mech sphere. I had seen like Code Geass and played Mech Assault when I was in a very low grade. I don't remember which. So I wasn't even playing mech games. And there's tons of mech games that everybody loves that I've never played, like Chrome Hounds. I don't play Mech Warrior. But I don't know. I thought they were cool anyway, because they're giant robots. I didn't need to be convinced. So Armored Core was kind of like the description of it instead of what actually came out in 6, which was interesting. Jump started it, but it wasn't my background at all. I'd say we didn't really have any big background in mechs before I made the game. If anything, I've consumed more mech media after making the game. Like I'd never seen a Gundam series before I started working on the game. I definitely like started my own engine on that, which I think is funny.
Starting your own take on it without having... So you've managed to make a mech game on the fringes without having gone into the overall genre.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of works. It prevents you from kind of leaning on stuff that you have nostalgia for, right? And you can kind of evaluate what's cool about all these different things more objectively, instead of kind of being subconsciously chained down to the stuff right?
So you'd say that you think you actually Granvir did better as a game because you weren't as familiar with the genre.
I don't know if that's true. I don't think it's, the greatest game of all time and everybody has their own preferences, but I think there's definitely some things you can find in Granvir that are not like other mech games and are probably could, like, I mean, I know there's things that annoy people that I don't do it like other mech games because, I don't have that background. It didn't make sense for me to do it like that at the time of deciding it. But there's also things that they were all doing right that I should have copied, for example. So it's a mixed bag, and I've gone back and done my research. I don't know if it would have been worse had I already played those games, but I think it gave it a kind of a fresh feeling to it. I don't know.
When you now that you've at least started getting a little more familiar with the mech genre, or starting with Armored Core, were you drawn to mechs in the sense that they were very slow mechanical machines, or were you more drawn to the ones that were just super fast moving, almost like
Oh,
I don't know, ballerinas in space?
I like the tank coated mechs. All mechs are cool. But if you ask me if they should be tanks or fighter jets, I would say tanks. So I like the slower ones. I like the BattleTech Mech Warrior pace personally, but that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy the other thing. And I certainly enjoy indulging in both of those things in Granvir.
So part of the fantasy of piloting a tank, whether you are a Granvir mech or just a regular tank, is the fact that they're just kind of clunky to control. Otherwise, you start getting into like that ballerina genre. How do you make a game where being clunky is fun and not frustrating?
I think that's very hard to do because my observation really is that any level of clunkiness for some gamers is kind of unacceptable. Everybody wants to move very snappy, like it's Call of Duty, no matter what they are, and they expect something else to sell the weightiness and the fantasy of what you're playing. And I don't think that's true for everybody. But I think there's a reason you zip around like a maniac in Armored Core 6 and you're a slow plotting thing that needs to accelerate in MechWarrior. There's a big spectrum of preference. And in terms of nailing the slower movement, I can't say if I've really done it. I mean, I certainly don't have entirely positive opinions on how the mechs control in Granvir, but when I want to make something feel slow and intentional, the one of the most important principles for me to keep in mind is that no matter how slow you are, it should always be responsive. So if I'm changing directions and I press the other key, I should start slowing down immediately, noticeably. Even if it's going to take me a long time to slow down and eventually gain that speed back up, I should be able to know it's happening right away, because you don't want the player to ever be confused about what's happening when they press the button. And there's always a learning curve to it. But in terms of making clunkiness feel good, I would say you have to hit responsiveness. And once the controls are responsive, they can kind of be as fast or as slow as you want.
And would you say that philosophy extends to the weapons as well, in terms of making them feel fun to use?
I think so. There's definitely a different element of what is acceptable in terms of speed for fun. And like a lot of things, it varies from person to person in terms of what their preference is. More strategic gamer versus a more action-oriented gamer has a very different opinion on what feels acceptable. I think that you can't just make every weapon super slow, because that's kind of your dopamine injectors for people playing the game, and the kind of slower, longer fire rates tend to drag that out. In Granvir, the standard reload time for most weapons, I believe, is 4 seconds. And people say that reload time is really long. And when you go play a Call of Duty game and put sleight of hand on, you're reloading in under half a second. There's definitely a big expectation for speed on that front in terms of how weapons handle. But I think if you put them in the right context, that stuff can work. And I think about reload speed all the time. And it was something that was really important in Airmen, where I had weapons that have like 30-second reload times. And the way I get around that and fill that space of these slow functioning weapons is that reload time needs to function on a scale that makes sense for the pace of the rest of the game. So if it's going to take me, like a reload that takes 1 second isn't really consequential when nothing interesting can happen in 1 second. But when the reload time is 4 seconds, that's a lot of time for me to shoot with another weapon or stand behind cover and get some heat back so I can do some actions that cost heat in the case of Granvir. Or in the case of Airmen, where it was much longer, that was your window to turn your ship and let a different side of it take damage. And all of those things happen on a pretty long scale. So just giving something a half-second reload makes that reload kind of pointless. But once it gets up to 4 seconds, and that's about the time it takes for you to do all these other actions, it slots in a lot more comfortably. And you can have these slow-moving weapons that don't take away from the gameplay, because you're not just sitting there, I'm reloading, I can't do anything, I got to sit here and get shot. It becomes an opportunity to do something else. And I think that's really important in terms of getting a slower game to work, is that it's slow, but there's not downtime. If that makes sense.
I think it does, especially because you can equip with your Granvir with so many different weapons. I think at one point I had a back cannon. I had 2 back cannons and a shotgun, and the back cannons ran out of ammo, and the shotgun was reloading, so I'm rounding a corner, just sitting there going, any moment now someone's going to round the corner and load faster, and right as they round the corner, I reloaded, and I just blasted them away. So there's also a sense of tenseness that comes from just hoping to God that you're faster than whatever's approaching you.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It does make me think of, because I used to play a lot of like Napoleonic Wars, so you're just sitting there reloading a musket, and someone could bomb rush me. I swear to God, I better load this thing as fast as I fucking can.
That's definitely a big part of the fantasy, right? Like, when you get the breech loading musket, you expect to be there for a minute at the least.
Well, it almost makes the kills with the heavy weapons feel better. If you got a cannon that fired like an SMG, every shot doesn't feel as satisfying. But if you get one long reload with a cannon that wipes the enemy off the face of the earth, that feels good to reload. It's almost like you're charging up that power to be able to release it all at once at someone. Oh
yeah, the damage certainly has to be worth the time. That's what I balance pretty much everything around is their DPS stat.
I tended to focus on slower weapons. I particularly took the rifle that it's not very fast, but it's really accurate and does a lot of damage, which meant I could just hold back while my partner charged melee, and I could just pick people off that got too close to him that he wasn't facing. Oh yeah, I really like the rifles. They take 2 hands, so they get some extra stats to compensate, and they're a great like workhorse weapon. Pretty much, you can have them do whatever you want to do and kind of lean on them as long as you don't fall behind in tier. There are a lot of weapons in Granvir. I made a build that was a one-handed shotgun and a one-handed pistol, and I then went for the centaur legs, which made me feel like a cowboy, both the cow and the boy. But then there's like a chainsaw blade out of 40k. There's like a halberd that you can get. There's lances. What was it like designing all the weapons for Granvir? Making new weapons is probably my favorite thing to do. One of my favorite things about like Dark Souls, Elden Ring is the amount of weapon variety they have. Like when I play a boss, I die and I'm like, all right, new weapon. All right, new weapon. And I'll cycle through like 5 or 6 of my favorites on every boss, just because I think it's a great way to put variety into the game. So it took me a long time to come up with that system to support as many weapons as I wanted to drop in there. But I'll basically put in anything that I think is cool. If you might have noticed, if you picked up a bunch of parts and gave a look at the part codex, the massive lance bias, I have an enormous bias for just giant pointy sticks. And basically whenever I need a break from some tedious feature that I've been working on, I will make a new weapon. And that's how most of them end up in the game.
But I'll put pretty much anything in there. I think that's one of the cool things about the mecha genre as a whole is how much ridiculous variety there is. You know, you can have a big tank gun on your torso and everyone says, yeah, that's a mech. Or you can run around with a sword and everyone's like, yeah, that's a mech. So I'll just put in stuff that I think is cool, stuff from shows that I've seen or games that I like. Like there's a gun lance. If you've ever played Monster Hunter, it's a staple weapon in there. Trying to think what other ones. Oh, there's a gun scythe. If you ever watched Ruby, tons of stuff like that.
I think not only do I love shotguns, but I love the model for it is like someone's going to make fun of me because I don't remember the exact term, like the breakneck shotgun, the breech loader shotgun's the one where you snap it in half.
Oh, yeah.
The idea of a giant mech the size of a building snapping a shotgun in half to reload it is the funniest image in my head, because at that scale, that is so silly.
Oh, yeah.
But it is so good to wipe someone off.
There's definitely some suspension of disbelief to do there, but it's worth it for the fun, rule of cool and all that.
I think that's just like the mech genre. Like it's like the main rule is definitely just it's the rule of cool. Why do we have swords? Because it's cool. There's no other. At this pace of technology, everything should just be AI and laser cannons, but that would be boring.
Exactly. We're here to have fun.
I did appreciate one thing I hate about some games, and I'll harp on like stuff like Skyrim, or I've been playing a lot of New Vegas lately, is all the melee weapons feel roughly the same, and that you just kind of swing them, and the only thing that's different is the speed. So when I was playing Granvir and realized not only were there different weapon animations depending on the type of weapon I picked up, but I could switch weapon attack styles, my first thought went, oh, it's like Dark Souls. I wonder if he's played that genre before.
Oh, yeah. I have a big appreciation for how Dark Souls approaches a weapon. There's just so much packed into a weapon and so many capabilities. I don't know. It gives me those brain tingles of like, well, it's got a low stab. Oh, this one's got a like 2 sweeps. So this one's got a really good move, but it's stuck behind these combos. I definitely don't go as deep into a weapon as a Souls game would, because you got to be able to pick them up and use them the first time you find them in Granvir, because you use what you get. But certainly Skyrim and certainly the Fallout games. Those weapons are very, very simple. Skyrim has a little bit more variety since it's actually built around meleeing. But yeah, the Fallout melee selection has something to be desired for sure.
You just end up in a situation where you end up with like a steel sword and then like an obsidian sword, and one has better stats, so you obviously pick the better stat one.
Oh yeah.
Whereas in something like Dark Souls or Granvir, if you get a sword, you're like, well, let me go in the testing grounds and see how the sword moves around, and if I like the movement of the weapon. So it means even like a starting weapon that you found at the beginning, if you liked the moveset of the starting weapon, you might just want to stay and upgrade it all the way to the end if that's the weapon you felt the most comfortable with. Which means every weapon, regardless of how much damage it does, feels memorable and tangible, whereas I don't remember the 15 different swords I switched to, like, in between my playthrough of Skyrim.
Yeah, I think that's definitely important to me to be able to, like, one of the things I do when I've got, let's say, like, the long sword, right? Well, maybe that's not a good example. We've got the lance, and the tier 1 lance, it stabs people, and it's got a stabbing attack. And you can set it, and then you can charge at people and impale them on it. And then there's a kind of a chain of lance through all the item tiers that keeps that very simple functionality in mind. So if you like that, and the stats can go up, and you can like that. But if you want to kind of branch out from that, there's special versions of lances, like ones that have a gun built in, or let's see, I've got a lot of lances. There's the gun lances. I'm going to get stuck here forever. I can't recall it. I had to click into the editor and go pick through. But the idea is, and just like in Souls games, like, yeah, there's the rapier, and then here's the rapier that shoots icicles, you can kind of build on those basic mechanics and get a lot of variety within places that people are already comfortable and want to branch out when they're ready.
Well, I loved how melee was momentum based, so lances weren't just running up and pressing stab repeatedly. It was, okay, if I time my thruster and then thrust at the exact moment they're approaching, I can just fucking go straight through them and one-tap them, and that's such an awesome feeling to be able to pull off. And I'm a medieval nerd, and lances are, like, underrated as fuck in terms of just nothing's piercing plate mail until you put a big stick on a horse and then you're going fast enough that you're stopping anyone on foot, and I mean anyone is getting stopped.
Oh yeah, I'm hugely attached to the lance charging. It's one of my favorite play styles. And now that there's horse legs, I mean, you can be the knight horse man you've always wanted to be. So, yeah, the lance charge mechanics are definitely one of my favorite things. It's probably one of the earlier kind of melee archetypes that popped up of like this charging oriented lance build.
And what was it like designing for all the equipment? Because there are so many different pieces for Granvir. You can choose to have an arm with a gun, an arm to hold a gun, or your arm is the gun. You have back pieces, multiple torsos, multiple legs, some of which, the horse leg, you have some on wheels. You can just be a tank, I think is really funny.
Oh, yeah.
You can just get a torso that's only a cannon, put it on treads, and that's the whole mech is you're now playing World of Tanks. So what was it like designing all that stuff?
So I think there's over 400 parts in the game at this point. I definitely don't, outline everything I want to make at the start. What the approach to it I have is to build extensible systems that I can pivot into doing a whole bunch of stuff. And it takes a lot of experience trying and failing to do that to kind of figure out what those systems are. So in Airmen, it was, a modular vehicle building game. And there were a lot of lessons learned in terms of how to effectively build the system that manages that so that you can continue to build on top of that for as long as you want. So when you look at a Granvir, I think on a technical perspective, it's not a set of legs, a torso, two arms. It's, I don't know, whatever connected to, I don't know, whatever connected to, I don't know, whatever. And each of those things can have connection points for, I don't know, whatever. So when you see stuff like tanks rolling around, they don't have anything to do with legs. There's no leg code that exists there. That's the tank code, So by building these very flexible systems, I can keep dumping more and more crazy stuff on top of it. So, when I get to the arm, well, the arm that just holds a weapon, and the weapon kind of gets to inform the arm in terms of how it gets swung around. So I don't have to, I have all these kind of launching points to put all this ridiculous stuff, and none of it really relies on the existence of other stuff unless it absolutely needs to, like how, a held weapon kind of relies on an arm existing, but your torso doesn't rely on legs existing because there might be tracks. And if I want to do anything else crazy and ridiculous, like this game doesn't have to be about mechs. I could make it spaceship parts, and you put spaceship parts together. Just trying to build flexible systems so that when you want to add this crazy, ridiculous part that you had an idea for at 1 a.m., you can write that down in your notepad and get working on it the next day. So, I mean, I've been working on the game for like 3 years. So it's just been a slow trickle of, I'm annoyed working on this boring feature. I'm going to do this stupid new part. And eventually that turns into a list of 400 parts.
I did like how some parts would just show up and I'm like, oh, I'm going to now build around this part. I did a build that was just 2 cannons on my back and I had a rifle, but I ended up getting an arm that if I'm holding a 2-handed rifle, I could punch with the arm and a giant spike would come out.
Oh yeah, I love the pile bunkers.
Oh, it's so good because I could be down a hallway in like a street fight shooting at someone. I notice someone's coming up to melee me, turn, punch them off the map, and then go back to the firefight.
Oh yeah. When I first added pile bunkers, you actually had to have the hand free. So they were only really useful if you were using a one-handed melee or ranged weapon. And eventually I was able to kind of push the system to a point where your offhand could actually use attacks, even though it was supporting another weapon. And I think that's really when that wrist mounted equipment kind of took off and melded into the game and made pile bunkers and wrist cannons and grappling hooks and all that stuff really feel like they had a solid place, because they just fit into way more builds, and you can get so much more out of them.
My friend, when he discovered he could get a wrist grappling hook, and then he could combine that with the lance
Oh,
and
a great combo.
a night plume. Yeah, he just was zipping around the map, lancing into anyone he saw. He was like, "This is my build. This is who I am."
Oh yeah.
Is a grapple knight that would just fly around stabbing everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the best part about the game, is seeing some cool part and slapping it on, and oh, your build is totally different now because you found this cool thing. Definitely, you know, I'm glad I can provide that fantasy.
One of the greatest quality of life features is you can press a button that pulls up every single part of your mech, and then you can bind so many different keys, so you can have every single part reload differently, or you can press one button to reload them all at once. You can have multiple guns fire from the same key, or multiple keys for each individual gun, so you can make the controls as complex as you want to where you're using the entire keyboard, or you could just boil it down to left click, right click, and unleash a barrage every alternating click. How did you come about developing that feature?
So I always get annoyed in games when I'm stuck with some controls that I'm not happy with. And I would really say that it wasn't really any choice but to do the system that I did, because Granvirs don't have some, archetype of how they're constructed. Like when you play Armored Core 6, you've got legs, torso, left arm, right arm, or well, I guess your arms are combined. Left hand weapon, right hand weapon, left back, right back, and then all your internals, right? Every AC has the exact same components. So it's not really a problem for the game to say, well, your back component, you're going to press Q to use that, right? And your right back component, you're going to press E to use that. But in Granvir, you might not have those things, and you might have a bunch of other things that you care about a lot more. So if I were to say reserve a key for here's your left weapon, your right weapon, your left back weapon, your right back weapon, your left wrist weapon, your right wrist weapon, your torso guns, I'd run out of keys. So, but for any player, there's a realistic limit in terms of, what they can actually handle. And people will kind of, limit themselves to what they think is appropriate. And it's not like balance wise, you need to be 8 guns to win a game. So kind of just letting people loose on controlling it however you want to control it, because I can't predict what you're going to build, ended up making the most sense. It's a double-edged sword though, and people definitely get confused by the controls. And there's a lot of people that play the game and just wish they didn't have to rebind the controls. And I think a lot of people get over it when they kind of realize why it's like that, because you can have 8 guns on your mech, and you probably have a pretty strong opinion about how those should be controlled. So, but especially for people starting out, there's a lot of disdain for having to open that controls menu every time they put a new part on their mech. But I try to do my best to make that a painless process with like preferences for certain categories of weapons, and kind of trying to pick a key for you. But there's only so much you can do when you can build whatever you want to build. And I don't even think it's the most flexible version of that system. I know in games like MechWarrior, you can throw your weapons into whatever groups you want, and then not just fire them all with one key, but have them on like a rotating cycle, which isn't quite where I'm at with Granvir. And then there's also that system kind of fights itself a little bit too when you slap everything on one key, because there is recoil on the mechs that does affect the shots, and firing your own weapon, if you have desynced fire rates, because one has like a slightly higher fire rate from a buff or something like that, you can actually end up throwing off your own shots, which is kind of funny. But I like that mechanic of, there's some consequences to just having 8 weapons. You don't actually get to do 8 times the damage. You have to, pilot it well and understand your vehicle in order to get the most out of it.
I did the exact path you were describing, where when I first played, I thought, I don't like these controls. Saw there was a keybind option, thought, fuck, there's so many things I need to tinker with. But once I did that tinkering the first time, I thought, okay, so I have total control over every aspect of my mech. This is the best thing ever, because it means I never have to worry about, this weapon requires 4. No other weapon requires a number key. Why the fuck do I gotta press 4 for this one weapon? That's the stuff that drives me crazy, where it's just a different part of the keyboard than what my hands used to, especially because I have carpal tunnel, so sometimes when it asks me to do certain things, it's not a great combo.
Not trying to play any DDR on the keyboard.
No, I don't think I am. So the Granvir has 3 separate campaigns, growing in complexity with each one, also mirroring the resistance getting more and more power. So it goes from just, hey, listen, we're just trying to retreat, get the fuck out of the area, to there's a super weapon in a far Arctic base, we're gonna go fuck with it. What was it like designing the 3 missions? Because it goes for, just the real basic, like a short, like 1 hour, you could just crush the mission, to a much longer expanded campaign, to a third one where you have to unlock the map and also build a base up to unlock aspects of what you can do from the other that you could have had access to at the other missions.
Sure. So the 3 campaigns in the game, there's Zero Front, which is the first one, Millennium Horizon, which is the second one, and Millennium Front, which is the third one. The order that they were actually conceptualized in is 2, 3, 1, and then the order that they were actually made in is 2, 1, 3. So it's there's a story kind of between where all of them came from. The first one is the first one. I knew I always kind of wanted to support having multiple campaigns, mainly because in terms of like the lifespan of the game and being able to continue adding new content to it, because I'm not a stat scaling, like I'm not a number go up roguelite. Like if you play Risk of Rain 2, for example, like you can just keep picking up items, and eventually, the game kind of falls apart as you start teleporting across the map against your will by pressing W. But those numbers can go up a lot, and you can kind of stretch that progression out over a really long session. But in Granvir, you run out of parts. And I really didn't want to do like, here's this same part, but the numbers are twice as big, without having at least some kind of visual distinction between the two. Like that does happen. But, as you go up in tiers, the weapons become not just higher statted, but more versatile and capable. So Granvir kind of has a limit in terms of how much I can actually scale the player up. And I wanted that meaningful, fast-paced scaling. I didn't want to drip feed you one part every mission, right? You have 4 inventory spots. I want you to use all of them. At least on hard, you get 6 on normal. So I needed a way to get longevity out of the game when I can't just endlessly add more enemies for you to fight as you get stronger, because I can only make you so strong in an interesting way to me. So the idea was that I would support different campaigns that play off of new game mechanics. So the first campaign is the straightforward one. Well, maybe not straightforward, but you travel across the map, you hit different regions, and that was actually that was just freely available for a while. I'm a big believer in getting people to play your game, so I put the game out for free for a long time. and people could play that campaign while it was in development. And I would, keep that campaign within scope, add things that I got feedback on and improve it. But at the same time, pay attention to what people liked and what people were interested in and what would be cool, but doesn't necessarily fit into the campaign. And that's kind of where the second campaign that was ideated, the third campaign in the actual game, came from, where the idea of having, instead of jumping between different bases, having a base that you actually get to build up and choose what your base is actually good at doing between missions. So that's kind of that was the big feature that created campaign 3, was, increasing the complexity of those between mission mechanics and letting you have a lot more control now that you're probably comfortable with how they work, having played campaign 1, knowing what's worth what, and then being able to develop your outpost in the way that suits your play style the most. And then when it came to the first campaign, that was actually a request from the publisher I work with. I think we really liked the demo as the first campaign and the idea of having a demo, but it was clear that it was too much for most people from their the first time they played. It was both hard, and I could add lower difficulties, and eventually I did. But there was just so much going on between missions that you had to participate in order to succeed and to have fun. I don't think the game is very fun when you don't have the downtime mechanics. It kind of wraps it together, in my opinion. So we needed just a simpler version of the game. And that's where the first campaign comes from. And we wanted it to be quick so you could experience kind of the full spectrum of the part pool that's in the game. So we wanted to blitz you through the loot and hopefully expose you to stuff that you think is cool. So it only takes place on a 3x3 instead of a 5x5, and the rest mechanics are far simpler and got spun out into character classes, where in the second campaign you can always visit the marketplace, but in the first campaign only the mercenary gets to visit the marketplace. So I can introduce all these mechanics that you have available to you all the time at a much slower pace through people just trying out the different characters. And it can kind of mentally prime them going in, okay, I got to use this mechanic, right? And they're ready for it. And then there's simpler ones that, just here's some extra loot, enjoy. So the first campaign was kind of designed as an on-ramp, knowing what the second campaign was already about.
So would you say that characters become, I guess, less relevant in the third campaign because, how do I put this? I guess because you have some of those options either restricted regardless or given to you regardless, like in campaign 2, that picking whether you're your hero or the scavenger is less important, the more difficult campaigns you pick?
Oh yeah, I would definitely say, kind of as a consequence for doing that, the role that a character plays in your overall power level is greatly diminished. I don't keep the characters don't do the same thing between the different campaigns, but they are definitely the most impactful in that first campaign, where everything else is simpler. There's just less going on, so relatively they're going to end up a lot stronger, and they are providing you with whole new functionalities. Now there are some that do remain pretty constant across all the campaigns. Like Scavenger is almost exactly the same. Mercenary doesn't change very much either, just because the only thing you lose access to is shops, but you kind of just have access to shops normally. But you still keep that extra credit gain and the expanded part selection. And I try to, get new features in there to keep them relevant for the ones that whose features kind of get rolled into a campaign. I think the engineer, for example, in campaign 1 has the ability to enhance parts, but in campaign 2 there's a specific map tile where part enhancement is done. So and then you can apply very weak enhancements anywhere. So what ends up happening to the engineer is that they can apply those enhancements faster for less time, which is just a resource between missions, and for less credits in that campaign. So, that's the same way it works in 3 too. So it definitely eats away at the budget of characters, but then you just build them back up again. Like in campaign 3, all the character classes now have the ability to pick their starting parts, just like the mercenary does in 1 and 2. And the deeper you get into campaigns, kind of as the developer, you get more leeway in terms of what you can actually do. Like, it doesn't make sense to make players choose their own parts from a pool in the first campaign when they've got no idea what anything does, right? They might think they know it's cool or whatever, but they also want to win, and they're not really going to be able to make an informed decision right when they start the game. But when you give them something like, here's the mercenary, this is what it does, there's more buy-in to the consequences of maybe choosing bad and willingness to learn that system. So once the players get deeper into the game and they just kind of have that knowledge, then you can kind of just dump it on them, whatever, and they're happy to do it.
So does that mean heroes have they been part of the game since the very start of it, or is that something you realized you wanted to give players in development?
Oh yeah, absolutely not. I think definitely happened in development. I don't remember if I made the mercenary. I think you could always play as the hero and the mercenary. I mean, not always, but you initially could only play as the hero. And then I added the mercenary. And then when Zero Front came around, that's where the extra character classes came from. I think. I'd have to go and check my notes, but maybe all the character classes came from Zero Front. No, I think I had the mercenary beforehand. No, I don't remember. It's I've updated the game a lot, but characters definitely became far more central to the game as part of Zero Front, and that desire to spin out all the mechanics. And it's like, people actually kind of resonate with these character choices, and it was also a very useful way to improve the reach of the game by providing characters that altered the way you play the game in subtle ways that people weren't happy with how it worked otherwise. Like, the big one that was added specifically to help people play the game was the scavenger. And one very common complaint in the beginning was that it wasn't worth it to fight, and you should, you're just being punished for fighting. I agree, it's not worth it to fight in general. It's worth it to get the loot that enemies are guarding, right? But not everyone sees the game like that or really wants to play the game like that. So I added the scavenger, which just causes enemies to drop apart, right? Because that's what a lot of people are used to when they play other games, like, I don't know, like Borderlands, right? You beat up the enemy and they drop an item. And it kind of changes that equation of whether or not it's worth it to fight on characters like the mercenary, which gets bonus credits on kills, and the scavenger. That incentive changes, and that idea of, I just want to fight everything and clear the map, becomes beneficial instead of a detriment, where on the other classes, well, you just ran out of ammo and you didn't really get any loot, and the credits you got didn't quite balance out the cost of doing that.
So my follow-up question to that is twofold. Are you worried that some people might fall off not realizing how some of these systems interact to benefit their playstyle? Because it's not like immediately told to them that's how that works. They have to interact with the game to make these discoveries. And are you worried that some players might have fallen in love with a class, and then when that class changes in the next campaign because that class ability is now just part of the campaign, they might not feel like that class is as impactful, and that might take away from their fantasy?
I have read every single review of the game, so don't think I've the complaint. I think there's been one complaint I can remember of characters losing their ability, and it was specifically with the engineer and how the engineer doesn't really have, like, can upgrade parts in the first campaign, and then the ability to upgrade parts is kind of only on specific tiles in the second campaign. And I didn't really fix that by giving the engineer the ability to upgrade parts whenever. I gave everybody the ability to upgrade parts whenever. And I think the person that made that complaint was happy with that solution. So I have not observed a lot of people who really mind having that ability disconnected from the character. It's what's more important is really that ability that they like is still accessible. And I think that is the case across all of the characters. I don't really see a lot of people, negative about the characters losing that relevancy, mainly because they you as a player still have access to that thing. I think there's probably some people that have said that it's not cool that the characters kind of get weaker, but and I'm sure there's a bunch of people that feel that way that haven't voiced their opinion in some way that I can ingest. But I don't think it's much of an issue. I think players are more interested in having the capability than specifically how they get it, if that makes sense.
And so a lot of these abilities are impacting the stuff you do in between missions, because the structure in the game is you start at your, like, a base, and you have a limited amount of time, and everything costs time. Later on, it starts to cost money, sometimes a third resource, whether that's manpower or whether you need to be a certain level with a specific faction. How did you come up with that was the structure you wanted to use in between the missions? And was that something you came up on your own, or is that something that you borrowed from other inspirations?
So, calling back to my non-mech game player roots, the inspiration for that came from playing Persona. Have you ever played that game series?
I'm familiar enough with it. Like, you mean like
the JRPG?
You mean like,
yeah.
Yeah. I can see the link between where you have, like, the school stuff you have to do with a limited time amount. Is that what you...
Exactly. Oh my God. So that's straight up where that came from. Persona 5 was the first Persona game I was playing. I was so excited for it to come to PC because I don't have any consoles. And I was like sitting there rubbing my hands together like a fly. Like, I can't wait to be a Persona fan. I'm going to be a Persona fan. And then 5 came out. I really liked it. Haven't finished it because it's, a 60-hour game. But I still really like it. One of my friends would, in the Discord call, he'd stream his Persona 4 playthrough. Yeah, I really like the way that game flip-flops from this downtime management game where that's how you get stronger in some senses. It's like a portion of your power comes from the choices you make during the downtime and how you spend those resources. You spend them in much bigger chunks than you do in Granvir. You spend your morning, your midday, or your night. Not exactly that, but and then you jump into the dungeon, you go do a dungeon crawl, and it has nothing to do with those game mechanics. The effects of them you get to feel because they made you stronger. But there's almost like 2 games crammed into one there, and I really was having a lot of fun with that duality, and that was something that I always wanted to incorporate from the start of, you do a mission and then you've got downtime and you spend that in an interesting way to influence your next mission. So yeah, that straight up came from Persona pretty much.
I think that's so funny because I really enjoy the time mechanic in Granvir because of twofold. It's much more interesting to think about how can I spend my time than what can I spend my money as like a sole resource. Especially if you're in a war, you can't exactly, like in most RPGs, be like, I'm gonna go do all the side quests while like the Empire is invading. That's not how that works. You have a limited amount of time to move before shit gets real. But to see that borrowed from, what do you want to do after school, Johnny? It mirrors perfectly, but it's so funny. I think that might be one of my favorite aspects to game design. It's just taking mechanics from one thing that has nothing to do with another and just mirroring them and seeing the follow-through of the two games. I think that's just the coolest part of game design.
For sure.
And then, so what was the... or we're closing up here. What was the inspiration behind a lot of the lore of the game? Because essentially there's a lot of themes of almost like settlement and colonialism going on with like corporate warfare.
Well, actually, I'm going to have to unfortunately burst a bubble. There's no corporate warfare going on. I know they're called the Millennium Company. They're not a corporation. They're a military organization. And it throws a lot of people off. And I know you kind of have to, the story is not complete. It progresses through and you do discover things about the lore and stuff like that. But they are called the Millennium Company for a reason. I'm not going to spoil it because it's not even revealed in the game. But I kind of wanted to avoid the corporate warfare thing. I felt like it's something that every other mech game is doing. I mean, it's what Armored Core is all about. And, I think a lot of people think that that's what it's about because they kind of project what they expect to see, right? And, I do call the enemy the Millennium Company, and I accept that. But there is an intentional mystery behind why they're called that you can maybe piece together if you read very carefully some specific and choose your dialogue options very specifically in Campaign 3. But I really wanted to tell the story through characters. I think those are my favorite. Some of my favorite stories are about individual people. I think. Have you ever read Game of Thrones?
I did, but the problem was that I read it in middle school. So I got like halfway through the first book and went, this is really fucked up.
Yeah, it's a heavy read for middle school. This. I think I was reading it in 10th grade, maybe. Well after they had come out. There were quite a few books out at the time. And yeah, I remember being like getting to this section and I'm sitting in my school study hall and I'm looking around like, what is going on? This is crazy. But that stuff aside, the cool thing about Game of Thrones is that it's, a story about, a nation and all these factions inside of it, but it's never told from that kind of scale. The story's never told like that. It's always about individual people, and every single chapter is named after the character that it's going to follow. But you get to tell this massive story taking place across multiple continents by just following like 12 different people and their perspective through it. So I really wanted to approach the story of Granvir that same way. So you have the communicator, and through the communicator, you talk to, your support crew, like your mechanic and your navigator in the first campaign, then a handler in the second campaign, and some of the enemies even pop into your DMs. And it kind of expands even more in the third campaign where you start talking to the people you're actually helping. And it kind of dives into some what I think are kind of interesting aspects of conflict, in which you're there to help these people on this planet, but that doesn't mean they like you. The main thread of campaign 3, the communicator conversations, is how you're the resistance, you're there to help them, there's enemy forces here, but the enemy forces, they're not that upset with them. They put a curfew on them or whatever, but they didn't like you before you showed up. The people there in that sector of the planet aren't really happy with the other sectors and kind of how things shuck out after the colonization. So when you show up to help them, they don't really like you much more than the other people. And you kind of get to see how that relationship changes. And you don't get to be celebrated when you show up. And you kind of have to, or you kind of see there's not, you don't make giant decisions on the narrative through your dialogue choices, but kind of explores that process of actually gaining people's trust, even though logically we think I'm getting invaded, of course I hate the invaders and I'll help anybody, right? But trying to approach that through a little bit more of a complicated lens through the characters that are experiencing it.
It does. I do think back to like when I read stories in either medieval warfare or like World War II, where they're trying to liberate the country and they go to this village and they're like, okay, we need supplies, we're liberating you, and they're like, listen, it doesn't matter who rules us, we're just here, we're here to vibe, and it's costing me more money to help you and your resistance than it is if all of you just fuck off and leave me alone.
Exactly. I think it's a fun concept to explore, because there's just so much of an individual character can come through in those interactions, and it makes for great gameplay, because it's really boring when you show up and everybody dumps a bunch of stuff on you. But when you gotta grease the wheels, and you gotta give them some credits, you gotta build up your manpower, rally that support behind you, it makes for a lot more interesting gameplay than here's 10,000 credits, we love you so much. The
two things I liked were you can being the hero and going, who's the Millennium Company, and just pissing off like your handler, which just reminds me of like in Fallout 2 when you go, who's the president of the United States. I just think of that line in my head so often. But I also loved going up against an enemy ace who was like, who do you fight for? And I'm like, I guess I fight for freedom. He's like, I'll remember that. Get in the match, insta kill. And I'm like, all right, great chat, buddy. I'll take your pistol now. Thank you.
Yeah, I love the conversations in campaign 2. I did not work alone on those. I had people help me out in terms of making those flow a little bit better and make sense. But yeah, I love that relationship that your character has with the handler of, if you sass them, they'll sass back, is kind of how I kind of approach that character. And then I can get so wacky with the aces, because hopefully that's the last time you ever talk to them and you blow them away in your next mission. But there's definitely some fun little conversations you can have in there.
And then I think what a lot of people are going to enjoy, especially at the end of the campaign, at the end of each campaign is going to be a boss for them to fight. So how was it designing bosses that were going to be fun, but unique in each campaign? Because the problem I feel with a lot of different games sometimes is you'll reach a boss that's just, hey, it's the same enemy, but we gave a lot of health. Good luck.
Yeah, I think giving them a lot of health does have to happen, because in Granvir you can absolutely steamroll the boss, which is its own fun thing. If you can get a build online to do that, and if you can't, then what am I doing, right? It should be something that should be possible. But the boss fights are the main challenge of making a good boss fight, is that they can't be too hard, but they need to feel like the hardest thing you fought, and And especially in a roguelite where you've just been playing for an hour, you're juiced up beyond belief because you found all this loot, you feel super powerful, and then I have to hit you with a reality check, right? Or you're God gamer and found the best loot and you get to breeze through it. But the boss can't be too hard, and I've had this problem where bosses are too hard. And the first thing that I do with the boss is figure out how I can kind of break up its abilities to be more accessible. So on normal difficulty, you usually only have 1 or 2 phases to the boss. And then each difficulty will add an extra phase. And kind of the ultimate version of that boss is the one on extreme. And you can, if you like the element of the boss fight, you can still play the stronger variant of it through the custom difficulty, or when you do a new campaign plus, each plus level increases the boss difficulty specifically. But you're doing a new campaign plus, you probably are a lot more comfortable and got a lot stronger of a mech going into it, so you can usually handle it. But I've definitely, at the beginning, bosses were way too strong. At the very beginning, bosses were way too boring because he just dropped down and it was a special Granvir, which is cool, right? Like, he's got parts I've never seen before, but that's not really enough to get a boss to fly. So then you add the phases, right? Really just to juice up the HP bar and stretch the fight out so you actually have time to do something interesting. And what I try to do is leverage new, unique components for each boss. So really the first boss in the game is the Campaign 2 boss, Millennium Horizon. And he's got these big quad cannons on a torso that you've never seen before that can have 4 gun mounts on it. Excuse me. And he's got his little bubble shield that just kind of prevents all damage. That one inspired by the first Mech Assault game. At the very end, you fight, I think it was called the Ragnarok, the special mech, and it's got a little bubble shield you can throw up momentarily. And you've never seen any of this stuff before, so that's kind of the off to the start of it. You've got to deal with this shield popping up that just kind of prevents all the damage, and he's got an insane amount of DPS. And the way I describe the second boss is it's kind of a dodge check. Where do you understand the dodge mechanics? Because if you do, you can last a lot longer. If you don't, it's basically over because he's got 4 giant guns. He's going to blast you in the face. But he fires them all at the same time, and it's just one guy. So he's relatively manageable if you just keep dodging, as long as you don't go overheat and have a high quality reactor. That's not really going to be an issue. So the boss pushes mechanics you already understand to their absolute limit, basically. If I don't dodge, I die. The shield itself is kind of its own mechanic, just a new mechanic for you to fiddle with. And at the baseline difficulty, that's all there is to it. Once you complete the first phase, he'll turn his shield off and he'll just start firing a lot faster. So it kind of shifts the momentum of the fight at the second phase, which is the next thing that I think is really important to getting a good boss fight, is you need that change in situation through it. It's not really fun to just plop in and see if I can DPS the boss before he DPSs me. Sometimes you have a build where that works and you can do it. But those are only specific builds, and that might not be a way you like to play the game. So having those phases and some crazy effect, just got to come up with something interesting, right? That turn the fight on its head and shift the momentum, change what is worth and not worth doing, is what makes it really feel like a boss instead of just a regular enemy. Because no other grunt with his little rifle walking down, nothing really changes. over the course of destroying him. So for the campaign 2 boss, at full power, what happens is you do the first phase is normal. He's got his shield, he's got his big guns, and you got to play around that. Second phase, he calls down reinforcements. So not only do you have to fight the boss, but you've got to fight a few extra grunts. I have a hate relationship with fighting multiple bosses, but that really depends on the game. And I think, a lot of games benefit super well from just tossing a bunch of random enemies in to the mix against a big boss. I think it can do a lot for a fight. It splits your attention. You have to decide whose shots am I actually going to dodge. It's a kind of a high panic moment, but the more resolved you are and aggressive, you can kind of get through that very quickly. Then once you clear the next HP bar, these big shield pylons drop down from orbit, and his shield never goes down until you destroy the pylons. So now you have to split your attention between dodging the boss's shots and destroying all these structures, so that eventually his shield goes down, and you get to fight him in his last phase, where he just starts firing at you twice as fast. So having these big shifts in what your priorities are, what you have to pay attention to, and making the fight feel like it's changing. There was a flow of momentum back and forth, especially on that first run. The novelty of everything is going to expire as it goes on. And I think you kind of have to still design against that. Where, like I said, the first time you get there in the simplest version, there's some novelty to the fact that he has a bubble shield and big guns that you have to dodge, or else he's got a few other things like a little stomp that pushes you away when you get close to kind of catch you off guard. But that stuff doesn't last nearly as long. But you're playing on normal, and you'll probably be able to get good enough to play on hard, where eventually you get to stack some extra mechanics on it to make it a more engaging fight, no matter how much you know about it. And I think I've done a better and worse job of that with different bosses. I think the boss in the first campaign, Zero Front, is a lot simpler, but he's built a lot more around the stuff that comes before him, where he's not the most complex boss. He's got a giant mace that he's going to swing at you, and it's going to hurt really bad. And he's really fast, so he can kind of close that gap. He's a melee boss. And then at higher phases, he gets a ranged weapon, in quotes, with a tail on his torso that stuff you've never seen before. And eventually he'll use the pile bunker in his mace that will probably one-shot you on the highest difficulty. But the challenge of that boss is actually just being prepared for when the boss comes, because you don't get any downtime right before it. You have to fight through waves of enemies, and the big difficulty scaling on that last fight isn't necessarily the boss. It's how many waves of enemies you have to fight before him. And it's almost impossible on extreme. You get to start with some backup guys, and the best way to beat this boss is to go all in and risk everything to destroy the waves before your own backup dies, so you have something to buy you time for the boss and his giant mace swinging at your face. So there's kind of a element of kind of just trying to stack up all these different tasks and variety into the boss. And even in the second campaign boss, there's a mission you have to do right before it. And your first time through, you might think, oh, take this mission nice and slow. And then you might not realize what's about to happen. You think, oh, I finished the mission, I'm done. And you've got to fight the boss now. And next time you come back, you're going to make that optimization to it. And then that's kind of where, and maybe you're not going to fight everything. You're kind of just going to run through the mission and jump to the boss. I know, massive spoilers for how the bosses work. I won't say too much about the campaign 3 boss, because that one I think is the benefits the most from the spectacle of doing it blind. But I try to attack the player from both execution in the moment and execution over time, where you have this big mission you have to do beforehand, and there's some kind of level of strategic thinking you need to do that will benefit you when you actually come up against the boss. So you were kind of fighting the boss before you ever get to the boss. Because if you get there and you have no ammo, it's going to be a lot harder. Or if you get there and you took a bunch of chip damage going through the mission beforehand, it's going to be a lot harder.
I lost both my arms.
Yeah, yeah. That's not. It's. I've had some unfortunate arrivals at the boss stage where it's like, I guess we're doing this. Not in the best shape, but putting those strategic elements in there, it's a double-edged sword, like many things in game development, where people will get there and they'll be frustrated that they felt like they had no chance because they have to do that learning, and a lot of the time people don't see the learning that is possible, right? And you'll get people.
I thought it was really funny because I made it to the end. I have no arms but my bat cannon, and then I just see, all right, I'm on a broken bridge where I clearly have to drop down on this suspiciously arena-shaped area.
I absolutely love that reveal. It's one of my favorite things to see in streams when people are playing the second campaign, getting there for the first time. They're all happy, like, oh, I beat the mission. That wasn't too bad. Like, I barely made it out. And then there's the boss arena. And it feels so good because it makes you think the mission's going to end. You just go do a regular extraction. You feel like you're out, and you're not even halfway. And I think it's a great moment for a game about resource management, right? Where you kind of understand the scope of which you actually needed to manage your resources. And it felt easy because it was supposed to be easy, right? And maybe you overplayed your hand a little bit. So I absolutely love that moment, getting to see people hit the campaign 2 boss blind.
How do you balance a boss when you can run into a situation where someone is struggling and you have the two variables of, okay, maybe this rocket barrage, the timing between the two attacks is actually too narrow, so I should give them more time to breathe, versus that guy's build was ass, he should not have done that.
It's a very, very hard balance. And I don't think there's any such thing as perfect on that. I think it's very important that there's normal, hard, and extreme difficulty in the game and custom difficulty so that it can stay accessible, right? Because that's what difficulty is about to me. It's accessibility. Everybody wants to beat that boss. And what's important is that it felt like a boss, not that it was actually hard and it made you throw your controller across the room. But you've got to. I think I'm pretty good at my game, and that isn't really the best thing all the time, especially if you don't have a deep understanding of your game. Like if I had to balance League of Legends, that would be very difficult because I don't understand it that well, and I'm not very good at it. You would get something very different than what you get in that game because it's so complex and I don't have a good handle on it. But even though I do have a good handle on Granvir, it tends to make the game way too hard. The original difficulty for the game was the current hard difficulty. And even then, a lot of those features, the way hard works, has been pushed to extreme. Like the carryover parts of when you lose a run, you get to start your next run with a number of parts from your previous run. Originally, that was just not in the game. And now extreme is the only difficulty where you don't get to make those parts. You get 1 on hard and 2 on normal. Or 10 if you're playing custom difficulty. It is impossible to make a difficulty that works, a single difficulty that kind of works for everyone. And when you're balancing stuff, you have to keep in mind your own limited perspective. I think the campaign 2 boss is easy peasy, and all you need is a tier 3 reactor on starter legs, starter gun, and you can do it. But that is not how most people feel about it. And it needs to be fun for people that think it's easy, and not too hard for the people that think it's hard, that it's frustrating. And you kind of just have to have a very strong understanding. And I've tuned that boss a lot since he first came out. I definitely wouldn't say I got it right the first time. Just like you were talking about with the timing between the attacks, that's changed a lot. It used to be way faster. But the reality is that people kind of use their heat inefficiently, and they're going to dodge sometimes, and those people should still be able to win. So the time between the attacks is kind of more than you need. But not everyone's playing to that same level, and those people should be accommodated for too. So you got to find a good balance with balance. But having difficulty settings is very important to getting that. And one of the things that difficulty settings change is the time between the attacks. I've fought that boss many times, and I would usually, when doing it, I would bring some of the crappiest gear I could imagine you having, and still getting there to fight it, to make sure that I wasn't just playing it in the best scenario possible and making sure it didn't just absolutely crush me when, all right, let's just pretend like I'm going to get hit by this attack, right? Lots and lots of playtesting and lots of listening to people when they give you feedback, whether or not you want to. Very important. When people are saying the boss is attacking too much and they don't have enough heat, I objectively know that you should certainly have enough heat, but that was their experience, and that's what they felt, and that was real, right? So there's probably something I can do in most of those situations to figure out what was really going on, right?
Well, I think that about covers everything. So, Bronze, thank you for being on.
Of course, thanks for having me.
While I have you here, is there anything you want to shout out? Any links to projects or social media or a local pizza place?
I don't want to give away my local pizza place. It's all mine. But I'm pretty one track, and just check out Granvir. It has a whole free demo. You can play the entire first campaign for free. Nothing's held back. You can play all the characters. You can play multiplayer. It's called Granvir Zero Front, and all your progress will transfer to the full game. So if you thought the game sounded interesting and I didn't spoil too much about what the bosses are, you can play it yourself for $0. But I don't have much else going on. I'm a one game guy, so I don't have much to shout out other than what I'm here for.
Oh, there you go. You know where you can find me. I'm on YouTube, Spotify, Podbean, and Apple Music, I think, wherever Podbean says I upload. You can find me on Twitter or BlueSky. I will have a link tree down below for all of those things, along with a link to Granvir the game, as well as in my link tree is a Ko-Fi. Donations do help keep the channel going, and I think that about covers everything, so until next time, bye!